This is the summary of People of the Lie, The Hope for Healing Human Evil by m.scott Peck, summarized by Cellwave Audio and narrated by Callum. Disclaimer. This is an unofficial summary and analysis of People of the Lie by m.scott Peck. It is not the original book and is not affiliated with or authorized by the author or publisher. This work is intended to provide key insights, analysis, and commentary for educational and informational purposes only. All names, trademarks, and references to the original content remain the property of their respective owners. Every effort has been made to ensure that this use is fair under Section 107 of the Copyright Act. Readers are encouraged to purchase the original book from the author or publisher for the full experience and context. Introduction. Evil is a word we often reserve for the worst headlines, wars, massacres, serial killers, and dictators. But what if evil is also present in ordinary homes, polite conversations, and respectable lives? What if it hides not in explosions of violence, but in the quiet refusal to face truth? This book invites us to look at evil not as something distant and monstrous, but as something closer, more unsettling, and far more ordinary than we would like to admit. It shows how deception, denial, and the refusal of responsibility can wound just as deeply as weapons. It traces how families can destroy their children with lies, how individuals can waste their potential in endless self-deception, and how groups can commit atrocities because no one dares to resist. But this is not a story of despair. It is a call to awareness, courage, and hope. For just as evil spreads through lies, healing begins with truth. Just as evil thrives on blindness, it weakens when seen clearly. And just as evil isolates and destroys, healing restores connection, responsibility, and love. The chapters that follow take us into unsettling places, homes, therapy rooms, battlefields, even encounters with the supernatural. Each story exposes how evil operates, but also points to the possibility of freedom. The journey is not easy, but it is necessary, because only when we face evil honestly can we find the hope to heal it. Chapter 1. The Man Who Made a Pact with the Devil. There was once a man who lived as though evil was not an outside force, but a companion he had chosen. On the surface, he was intelligent, capable, and polite. But underneath, his life revealed a pattern of deceit, manipulation, and destruction that could not be dismissed as ordinary weakness. He had, in his own words, made a pact with the devil. The story unfolded not through dramatic violence, but through subtler betrayals. He would charm people into trusting him, only to use that trust to control them. His lies were not the careless slips of someone trying to cover mistakes. They were deliberate tools, crafted to twist reality into something that served his needs. Every word he spoke carried the weight of calculation, designed to keep him in power and others in confusion. One of his most chilling traits was the ability to make others doubt themselves. When someone confronted him with the truth, he would turn the conversation until they began questioning their own sanity. Wrong was made to look right, cruelty disguised as necessity, and responsibility shifted onto those least able to carry it. He created an atmosphere where lies became the air people breathed, and soon they could no longer separate illusion from reality. What made his story even darker was the absence of remorse. Most people stumble, hurt others, and feel guilt afterward. Guilt, for all its pain, is proof that a conscience is alive. But this man wore no such burden. Instead, he considered his manipulations a form of cleverness. He took pride in how easily he could bend people to his will. His conscience, if it ever existed, had been smothered by years of self-deception. Evil in this form was not about wild rage or obvious cruelty. It was quiet, patient, and insidious. It hid behind masks of normality, behind a smile, polite words, even acts of apparent generosity. But each mask served the same purpose, to cover the emptiness where compassion should have been. His lies were not just tools for others, they were lies he told himself, convincing himself he was righteous, misunderstood, even heroic. Those around him suffered deeply. Victims of this kind of evil rarely walk away with scars on their skin, but their minds carry wounds that cut even deeper. They begin to believe they are weak, foolish, or broken, when in truth they have been carefully shaped by another's deceit. The man's greatest weapon was not a fist or a gun, but the subtle destruction of another's spirit. The phrase, "pact with the devil," was not literal, but it captured the essence of his life. He had chosen lies over truth, pride over humility, control over love. Each choice seemed small in the moment, but together they formed a pattern that left him hollow. Evil, in this sense, is not born in a single grand decision, but in countless tiny refusals to face reality. By refusing to admit fault, to take responsibility, to show compassion, he surrendered more and more of himself to the dark. Yet even as the shadows deepened, there was something to be learned from him. His life showed how evil works, not with horns and fire, but with whispers, masks, and mirrors. It thrives where people cannot or will not confront the truth. It grows strongest where lies are repeated until they feel like reality, and it finds a home in the hearts of those who would rather control others than face their own flaws. In many ways, his story was less about him and more about the warning he represented. Evil is not always easy to spot. It can dress itself in charm, respectability, and even apparent kindness. It does not always look monstrous. Sometimes it looks ordinary. But its essence is always the same: the rejection of truth, the destruction of love, and the elevation of self above all else. The man who claimed to have made a pact with the devil was, in the end, a mirror. Looking at him was to see what happens when lies replace truth, when manipulation replaces love, and when pride becomes the only compass. His life was a cautionary tale. Evil is not far away, lurking in shadows. It is close, often disguised, and waiting for the moment when we choose the easy path of deceit over the harder path of truth. The story closed not with a tidy resolution, but with an unsettling reminder. Evil, when it takes root, does not need dramatic gestures to destroy. It thrives in silence, in denial, and in the small daily choices to protect one's image rather than one's soul. And so the man who boasted of his pact with the devil was not merely an oddity. He was a warning of how easily anyone can be consumed if they stop seeking truth and allow lies to take their place. Chapter 2. Toward a Psychology of Evil. To understand evil, it must first be stripped of its disguises. It does not always appear with rage or violence. More often, it takes the form of something deceptively ordinary: parents, neighbors, leaders, even friends. What makes it so dangerous is not its obviousness, but its subtlety. The heart of evil is the persistent refusal to face the truth. Evil thrives when people deceive themselves. Instead of admitting their flaws, they twist reality until it fits the image they want to maintain. Rather than acknowledge guilt, they push blame onto others. They are skilled at projection, shifting their own darkness outward, accusing the innocent of the very sins they themselves commit. In this way, they remain good in their own eyes, while those around them carry the weight of blame and shame. One of the defining traits of evil people is their compulsive lying. They lie not only to others, but to themselves, weaving a web so tight that truth suffocates within it. These lies are not spontaneous slips, but carefully constructed narratives meant to protect their self-image at any cost. When cornered by truth, they do not confess. Instead, they double down, building higher walls of deceit. Behind this deception lies a profound laziness of spirit. True growth requires the hard work of self-examination, admitting wrongs, wrestling with guilt, making changes. Evil rejects this work. It takes the easier path of denial, of scapegoating, of pretending perfection while secretly causing harm. This laziness is not harmless idleness. It is active avoidance of responsibility, a refusal to engage with reality. What emerges from this pattern is a kind of counterfeit goodness. Outwardly, these people may seem respectable, even admirable. They may hold positions of trust, present themselves as moral, or take pride in their apparent virtue. Yet their morality is hollow, used only as a mask to shield them from accountability. True goodness is rooted in humility and honesty. Counterfeit goodness hides behind arrogance and lies. In relationships, evil reveals itself through the destruction of others. Instead of nurturing, it drains. Instead of supporting, it manipulates. Families can be poisoned when one member consistently refuses responsibility, forcing others to absorb the pain. Children raised in such an atmosphere grow confused, doubting their own perceptions, because the adults who should guide them instead twist reality to protect their pride. Evil also shows its face in scapegoating. When problems arise, the blame is never internalized. Instead, it is thrown onto the weakest or most vulnerable. In families, it might be the quiet child who becomes the problem. In organizations, it may be the low-ranking employee who is sacrificed to preserve the reputation of leaders. The common thread is avoidance of responsibility through the destruction of another's dignity. This process is more insidious than outright violence. A violent act is visible, undeniable. But the slow erosion of another's confidence, the constant twisting of truth, the manipulations that leave someone doubting their own mind, these are wounds hidden beneath the skin, often invisible to outsiders. Yet they leave scars every bit as deep. At its core, evil is not defined by the scale of harm, but by its direction. It seeks to preserve self-image at all costs, even if it means sacrificing truth, love, or justice. It resists confession, resists growth, and resists humility. The refusal to acknowledge failure becomes a prison, and in defending themselves against the smallest admission of guilt, evil people build walls so high that nothing good can pass through. The psychology of evil, then, is the psychology of refusal. Refusal to see, refusal to admit, refusal to change. Every human being struggles with pride, denial, or defensiveness, but most eventually feel the tug of conscience. What separates evil from ordinary weakness is the persistence of refusal, the unyielding commitment to lies. This persistence does not simply protect the self, it actively harms others. By offloading guilt and responsibility, evil people force others to carry burdens that are not theirs to bear. They drain energy, twist relationships, and destabilize communities. Their lies become traps for those who care about them, ensnaring family, friends, and colleagues in endless cycles of confusion and hurt. To confront such evil is to encounter resistance at every turn. Attempts to shine light on the truth are met with denial, anger, or fresh layers of deception. Healing becomes nearly impossible because healing requires honesty, and honesty is precisely what evil refuses to give. And yet, there is hope in recognizing the pattern. Once the masks are stripped away, once the refusal is named for what it is, evil loses some of its power. Awareness is the first step toward freedom, both for those trapped in relationships with evil and for those seeking to guard themselves against its influence. Understanding the psychology of evil does not mean excusing it. On the contrary, it means holding it accountable, refusing to be deceived by appearances, and recognizing the destructive patterns for what they are. It means refusing to carry the weight of another's lies, and choosing instead to live in truth, however painful truth may be. In this way, the exploration of evil becomes not just a study of pathology, but a call to courage, To face evil is to confront lies with truth, to replace projection with responsibility, to counter manipulation with clarity. It is not an easy task, but it is the only path to healing. Evil may hide behind politeness, respectability, or even apparent piety, but its essence is simple: the rejection of truth and the destruction of love. By understanding its psychology, it becomes possible to see through the disguises and to protect both oneself and others from its grip. Chapter 3: The Encounter with Evil in Everyday Life. Evil does not always stride into the room with a weapon in hand or hatred on its face. More often, it enters quietly, wrapped in the fabric of ordinary life. It can live in the gestures of a parent, the tone of a teacher, the silence of a leader, the excuses of a friend. It rarely announces itself. Instead, it hides in patterns so familiar that they are often overlooked until the damage is already done. Everyday encounters with evil begin in small acts of dishonesty, a lie told to avoid responsibility, a truth withheld to preserve an image. A child is blamed for the anger of a parent. These may appear insignificant, but their impact accumulates. Each act corrodes trust, erodes dignity, and reshapes reality until what is false begins to feel normal. One of the clearest places this appears is in families. Families are supposed to be havens of love, protection, and truth. But in certain homes, love becomes conditional, protection is replaced by control, and truth is buried beneath lies. A child may grow up believing that their needs, their feelings, their very existence are the source of family problems. Not because it is true, but because scapegoating is easier for adults than facing their own failures. Take the story of Roger, a boy whose parents gave him his deceased brother's gun as a Christmas present. The gift was not just thoughtless, it was a wound wrapped in ribbon. To outsiders, it might have looked like an odd but harmless gesture. To Roger, it carried the unspoken message that his pain was invisible, his safety unimportant, and his worth less than the family's need to avoid facing grief. The evil was not in the object itself, but in the deliberate blindness of those who gave it. They refused to see what was obvious, that a child mourning his brother should never be handed the weapon that ended his brother's life. This kind of blindness is not innocent, it is chosen. It requires a turning away from reality, a refusal to face the truth of pain and responsibility. And when people make that choice again and again, they become instruments of destruction in the lives of those around them. Evil in everyday life also wears the mask of respectability. A boss who bullies employees but presents himself as a model of professionalism. A religious leader who uses faith to manipulate instead of guide. A parent who insists on discipline while secretly crushing the spirit of their child. Outwardly, such people may appear strong, moral, or successful. Inwardly, they carry the rot of denial, projection, and deceit. The most striking feature of these encounters is the way they distort reality. Victims of everyday evil often doubt their own perceptions. A child told repeatedly that they are ungrateful or lazy begins to believe it, even when their only crime is being honest about their needs. A spouse who is constantly blamed for every problem starts to wonder if they are truly at fault. Evil people thrive in this confusion. The more others doubt themselves, the easier it becomes to maintain control. What makes these encounters so destructive is not just the immediate harm, but the lingering effect. Bruises heal, but the wounds of confusion, self-doubt, and betrayal remain long after the event. They shape the way people see themselves in the world, often leaving scars that persist for a lifetime. And yet, evil in everyday life is often excused or overlooked. People explain it away as stress, personality quirks, or simple mistakes. Confronting it feels too uncomfortable, too disruptive, so silence takes the place of truth, and evil continues unchecked. The lies grow deeper, the scapegoating sharper, and the victims more isolated. Recognizing these patterns requires courage. It requires the willingness to name what is happening, even when it feels impolite or risky. It means saying, "This is not love," even when the person insists it is. It means refusing to carry the blame that has been unfairly handed over. It means standing in the truth, even when lies press in from all sides. But recognition alone is not enough. Confronting everyday evil demands choices. It may mean stepping away from relationships that will not change, no matter the cost. It may mean calling out injustice in a workplace or community. It may mean offering support to those who have been scapegoated, helping them rediscover the truth about themselves. Every act of courage chips away at the web of lies and makes room for healing. The encounter with evil in daily life is unsettling precisely because it looks so normal. A gift under a Christmas tree, a joke at the dinner table, a policy at work, a rule at church. But beneath the surface, these moments can carry messages of cruelty, control, and deceit. They remind us that evil does not need to be spectacular to be real. It can thrive in silence, in neglect, in denial, and in the lies we choose to believe because they are easier than facing the truth. And yet, hidden within this reality is also a source of hope. If evil can grow in small acts, so too can goodness. If destruction is built one denial at a time, healing can be built one truth at a time. Each refusal to lie, each step toward responsibility, each act of compassion weakens the hold of evil and strengthens the power of love. The lesson of everyday encounters with evil is not only a warning but an invitation. A warning that ordinary life can be a breeding ground for deceit and harm. An invitation to live differently, to face truth even when it hurts, to choose love over control, humility over pride, honesty over convenience. Evil may be woven into daily life, but so too can courage, compassion, and truth. And in the end, it is those daily choices, not the dramatic ones, that determine whether we perpetuate destruction or open the door to healing. Chapter 4. Charlene. A teaching case. Charlene was the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately draw attention. She dressed with care, spoke with confidence, and seemed to carry herself as though she had the answers to questions no one else had even asked. Yet beneath that polished surface was a life marked by emptiness, frustration, and an uncanny ability to drain those around her. Her story revealed something unsettling. Evil is not always dramatic, violent, or obvious. Sometimes it wears a smile, sits politely in therapy, and speaks in circles that sound intelligent but lead nowhere. Charlene was not dangerous in the sense of physical harm. Instead, she embodied a different form of destruction, the slow suffocation of truth through endless self-deception. When she sought help, it was not because she truly wanted change. She wanted validation. She wanted to be admired for her intellect and sophistication, even by those she claimed to be asking for guidance. Questions aimed at uncovering her responsibility for her unhappiness were deflected with clever arguments. Every attempt to confront her with the truth was met with evasion, redirection, or a new performance of suffering designed to win sympathy. Her conversations became exercises in futility. She would ask for insight, but when it was offered, she twisted it into something unrecognizable. Advice was turned into a personal insult. Observations were reframed as misunderstandings. She was not seeking healing, she was seeking control. By refusing to let truth penetrate, she maintained her carefully constructed image of superiority. This endless resistance was not simply stubbornness, it was a way of life. Charlene had perfected the art of appearing as though she was engaged, while in reality refusing to take even the smallest step toward responsibility. She drained energy from every interaction, leaving those who tried to help her exhausted, confused, and frustrated. At the center of her pattern was a refusal to acknowledge fault. For every problem in her life, there was always someone else to blame. A friend who betrayed her, a family member who misunderstood her, a society too shallow to appreciate her depth. She was never the source of her difficulties, at least not in her own eyes. To admit otherwise would have required humility, and humility was something she would not allow herself to feel. Her case illustrated a chilling truth. Evil is not always about cruelty inflicted outwardly. Sometimes it is about the destruction of potential inwardly. By refusing to engage with truth, Charlene sabotaged every chance she had for growth. Her intelligence, which could have been used to deepen her understanding, became a weapon for defending lies. Her charm, which could have built real connections, became a shield to keep others from seeing her emptiness. What made her presence so destructive was the way she consumed those around her. Helping Charlene was like pouring water into a sieve. No matter how much was given, nothing remained. She demanded attention, drained patience, and offered nothing in return. This pattern left others questioning themselves. Was the problem their failure to explain clearly enough? Were they too harsh, too impatient, too unkind? But the truth was simpler. Charlene's life was built on refusal, and no amount of compassion could fill the void created by that choice. Charlene's story shows how evil often disguises itself, not in grand gestures, but in small, persistent denials of truth. It is found in the polished surface of someone who insists they want help, but rejects every opportunity to change. It is revealed in the endless cycle of seeking attention without responsibility, of draining others without giving back, of demanding truth without ever allowing it to take root. Her life carried a warning for anyone who tries to confront evil in everyday settings. Not all battles are fought with obvious weapons. Some are fought in conversations that go in circles, in relationships that never move forward, in the quiet erosion of patience and hope. To engage with someone like Charlene is to risk being caught in a web designed not for healing, but for entrapment. And yet, her story also points to a deeper lesson: the importance of discernment. It is easy to mistake resistance for struggle, to confuse cleverness with insight, to believe that someone's polished words reflect a genuine desire for change. But discernment reveals the difference between those who are wrestling with truth and those who are running from it. The former may resist, but beneath their resistance is a longing for growth. The latter resist endlessly because change would shatter the fragile image they have worked so hard to protect. Charlene was not beyond human dignity, but she chose to live in a way that denied it. By refusing responsibility, she denied herself the possibility of love, of transformation, of freedom. Instead, she clung to lies, not only deceiving others, but imprisoning herself within the very walls she built. Her story lingers because it shows evil not as something far away, but as something that can live in polished rooms, intelligent words, and seemingly ordinary lives. It is not always explosive. Sometimes it is the slow, steady decay that comes from endless self-deception. And it reminds us that one of the greatest dangers we face is not the obvious enemy, but the subtle one who sits across from us, smiling, while quietly refusing the truth that could set them free. Chapter 5. Of Possession and Exorcism. There are times when evil takes on dimensions that feel larger than life. It no longer hides behind ordinary lies or the subtle manipulations of everyday relationships. Instead, it presses into the realm of the spiritual, where words like possession and exorcism become part of the struggle. This chapter explores that space, not as fantasy or myth, but as the lived reality of people who encountered forces darker than psychology alone could explain. Possession is not simply about losing control. It is about a surrender of the self so deep that another presence seems to move in. Those who experienced it did not merely act out of weakness or neurosis. They spoke with voices that did not sound like their own, recoiled from symbols of light and goodness, and displayed knowledge or strength far beyond ordinary capacity. These manifestations left little doubt that something more than human will was at work. Exorcism, then, became the act of reclaiming territory. It was not a magical ritual in the Hollywood sense, but a battle of truth against deception, of light against darkness. The process demanded patience, courage, and above all, faith that love was stronger than the lies that had taken root. Prayer, authority, and compassion became weapons, not to destroy the possessed, but to free them from the grip of what bound them. Those involved in exorcisms often described the strange mixture of awe and terror that accompanied the experience. On one hand, there was fear in the face of something that seemed beyond the natural. On the other hand, there was the unmistakable sense that evil, no matter how dramatic, was not invincible. In every confrontation, truth proved more powerful than deceit, and love was more enduring than fear. But possession was not always about demons in the literal sense. At its heart, it symbolized what happens whenever people allow lies to take such deep roots that they no longer recognize themselves. Each refusal of truth, each act of deception, each surrender to pride opens the door a little wider. Over time, the person becomes less of who they were meant to be, more of what the lies have made them. Whether explained in psychological or spiritual terms, the effect is the same. The self is lost and something destructive takes its place. The reality of exorcism also underscores another truth. Evil resists exposure. In sessions where prayers were spoken and commands issued, the force within would thrash, scream, or lash out, desperate to maintain control. Lies do not leave quietly. They cling, they fight, they disguise themselves. The struggle could last hours, even days. Yet each time, persistence mattered more than drama. Patience wore down resistance, truth broke through deception, and slowly, freedom emerged. This raises a difficult question. Why would anyone allow such darkness to enter in the first place? The answer often lies in the small choices that seem harmless at first. A flirtation with lies, a taste for control, a refusal to face guilt. Over time, these choices accumulate, and what begins as laziness of spirit becomes bondage of soul. Evil rarely barges in. It waits for the door to be left open, then walks through with quiet confidence. Still, even in the most disturbing cases, the possibility of healing remained. Exorcism was never about spectacle. It was about restoring a person to themselves, about breaking chains and offering a chance at wholeness. Those who endured the process often emerged exhausted but relieved, as though waking from a nightmare that had seemed endless. Their eyes carried the clarity of someone who had been lost, but found their way back to light. What makes these stories significant is not just their dramatic content, but the lessons they carry for ordinary life. Possession, in a broader sense, reflects what happens whenever people hand over control to lies. Exorcism reflects the struggle required to reclaim truth. Most people will never encounter demons in the literal sense, but all will face the temptation to surrender to deception, to let pride or fear rule their lives. And all will need, in some form, the courage to drive those forces out. The presence of evil in this extreme form is unsettling, but it also reveals the strength that lies in truth. Lies shout, thrash, and resist, but they cannot endure when confronted with patient honesty and steadfast love. Darkness may seem overwhelming, but even the smallest flame can drive it back. In this way, possession and exorcism stand as metaphors as much as realities. They remind us that evil seeks to take over whenever it is allowed, but it can never fully triumph where people are willing to fight for truth. Healing is possible. Freedom is possible. Even when the grip feels unbreakable, there is always hope that the chains can fall. Chapter 6. My Lie. An examination of group evil. Evil does not belong only to individuals. It can spread across families, institutions, and even nations. Nowhere is this clearer than in the tragedy of My Lai, where ordinary soldiers became instruments of horror. On a single day in 1968, hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians, men, women, children, even infants, were massacred by American troops. The event shocked the world. But what made it so haunting was not just the scale of the atrocity, but the ordinariness of those who carried it out. The soldiers at My Lai were not monsters in appearance. They were young men, many barely out of their teens, trained to follow orders, conditioned to see the enemy not as human beings, but as targets. Fear, confusion, and anger blurred the lines of morality. When their leaders commanded destruction, they obeyed, and obedience became a shield against conscience. The massacre revealed the terrifying power of group dynamics. In a crowd, responsibility becomes diluted. Each person feels less accountable because blame can be shared, spread thin across many shoulders. Under these conditions, acts that would horrify an individual acting alone suddenly feel permissible, even justified. In My Lai, soldiers who might never have harmed a child in their hometowns pulled triggers without hesitation, convinced that what they were doing was part of duty. Group evil thrives on this dilution of responsibility. It feeds on conformity, on the desire to belong, on the fear of standing apart. To question orders in such an environment is to risk isolation or punishment, so silence becomes complicity. Lies about necessity. They might be the enemy. This is war. We are only following orders, grow into justifications for brutality. The aftermath was equally revealing. When news of the massacre broke, the instinct of institutions was not confession, but cover-up. Reports were softened, evidence buried, blame shifted. The military, like the individuals within it, sought to protect its image at all costs. Responsibility was pushed down to the lowest ranks, while those higher up defended themselves with claims of ignorance or necessity. Once again, lies took the place of truth, and scapegoats carried the weight of guilt. What happened at My Lai is a chilling reminder that evil does not always look like hatred in the eyes of a single man. It can look like obedience, like silence, like loyalty to a group at the expense of conscience. It grows when people stop asking questions and simply follow the crowd, allowing the momentum of the crowd to carry them toward destruction. And yet, within the darkness there were glimmers of light. Not every soldier participated in the killings. Some refused to fire, even under pressure. Most striking was the story of a helicopter pilot who, upon realizing what was happening, landed his craft between soldiers and villagers, threatening to open fire on his own countrymen if they did not stop. His courage saved lives, but it also exposed the cowardice of a group that had allowed evil to take control. The lesson of My Lai extends beyond the battlefield. It shows how institutions, governments, corporations, even families can become agents of evil when they place image and loyalty above truth. When members are discouraged from questioning, when obedience is valued more than integrity, the door is opened for atrocities, large or small. A workplace that covers up corruption, a school that silences victims, a community that protects abusers. Each becomes its own version of My Lai, where the group's survival matters more than justice. The danger of group evil lies in its invisibility. Few people set out to commit atrocities. Most begin with small compromises, small lies, small acts of silence. But over time, these accumulate until people find themselves participating in destruction they once would have condemned. Evil, when shared, becomes easier to excuse, easier to ignore, easier to accept. What makes My Lie unforgettable is the way it strips away illusions. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary harm when caught in the grip of groupthink and institutional denial. It warns that evil is not only in the violent criminal or the deranged tyrant, but also in the soldier who follows orders, the officer who signs reports, the bureaucrat who files papers, the leader who chooses silence. But just as evil can spread through groups, so can courage. The helicopter pilot who stood against his comrades proved that one person's refusal can break the spell of conformity. He showed that conscience, even in the midst of overwhelming pressure, still has the power to resist. His act reminds us that the antidote to group evil is individual integrity, lived out with courage even when it costs dearly. My Lie stands as both tragedy and warning. It is a tragedy because of the innocent lives lost, the trauma inflicted, and the shame carried by those who participated. It is a warning because it reveals how quickly ordinary people can become agents of destruction when they surrender conscience to the crowd. Evil does not need monsters to thrive. It needs only silence, obedience, and the small daily decision to value image over truth. My Lie is the story of what happens when those decisions compound, when lies replace responsibility, when groups sacrifice humanity for survival. And yet, even here, the possibility of redemption remains. If individuals can resist, if institutions can choose confession over cover-up, if truth can be faced no matter how painful, then healing can begin. My Lie's legacy does not have to be only shame. It can also be a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of courage can still break through. Chapter 7. The Danger and the Hope. To face evil is to face one of life's most unsettling realities. It is not something confined to criminals or tyrants in distant lands. It can take root in homes, in workplaces, in institutions, even in the quiet corners of one's own heart. The danger lies not only in what evil does, but in how easily it disguises itself as normal, respectable, even good. The great danger is blindness. Evil thrives when people refuse to see it. Parents deny the harm they inflict on their children, telling themselves it is discipline or love. Leaders justify corruption as a necessity. Communities excuse cruelty as tradition. The refusal to face the truth is the fertile soil in which evil grows. And once it has taken root, it spreads through lies, manipulation, and fear until entire groups are caught in its grip. This danger is not abstract. History shows countless examples of societies that allowed evil to flourish because too few were willing to confront it. Families collapse under the weight of secrets. Organizations destroy lives to protect reputations. Nations commit atrocities in the name of loyalty or order. Each case begins with small refusals to acknowledge truth, and each ends with devastation that could have been prevented. But just as evil grows through blindness, hope grows through awareness. To name evil for what it is, to strip away its disguises and see it clearly, is the first step toward breaking its power. Awareness disrupts the lies. It shines light into the darkness, making it harder for deception to take hold. Even when the truth is painful, it is always less destructive than the lies that replace it. Hope also lies in courage. Confronting evil is rarely comfortable. It demands standing against the current, refusing to follow the crowd, risking rejection or punishment. But courage has a ripple effect. One person's refusal to participate in lies can permit others to do the same. One voice speaking truth can inspire many more. The courage of a single individual can interrupt the momentum of destruction. Another source of hope is responsibility. Evil thrives where responsibility is denied, where blame is shifted and excuses multiply. Healing begins when people accept their part in the harm, no matter how small. Responsibility restores integrity. It opens the door for forgiveness, for growth, for reconciliation. Without it, there can be no healing. With it, even the deepest wounds can begin to close. Yet hope is not naive. To confront evil is to acknowledge the risk that it will resist, that lies will fight back, that those invested in deception will cling to their masks. But the resilience of truth should never be underestimated. Lies require constant maintenance. Truth stands on its own. Lies drain energy. Truth restores it. Lies divide and destroy. Truth heals and unites. The danger and the hope are intertwined. To ignore the danger is to leave ourselves vulnerable, blind to the ways evil creeps into daily life. To embrace the hope is to believe that no matter how strong deception appears, it can be overcome. Evil is not invincible. It resists healing, but it cannot ultimately withstand the persistence of truth and the endurance of love. The journey toward healing human evil is not simple. It requires vigilance, courage, humility, and compassion. It asks individuals to look honestly at themselves, to confront the lies they may have believed, to resist the temptation to scapegoat or deny. It asks communities to value truth over image, justice over silence, integrity over convenience. It asks each of us to choose, again and again, between the easy path of denial and the harder but freer path of truth. The danger is real. Evil can destroy families, corrupt institutions, and devastate societies. But the hope is just as real. Healing is possible. Freedom is possible. Redemption is possible. Every act of truth-telling, every step toward responsibility, every choice of love over pride chips away at the power of evil and makes room for transformation. In the end, the message is clear. Evil is not something to fear in silence, but something to confront with open eyes and steady hearts. The danger lies in pretending it does not exist. The hope lies in facing it, naming it, resisting it, and choosing the path of truth and love. In that choice, healing begins, not only for individuals, but for families, communities, and even nations. This has been the summary of People of the Lie, The Hope for Healing Human Evil by m.scott Peck, summarized by Cellwave Audio and narrated by Callum.